Hello, America. My name is Charles Sugrim. I'm an immigrant here in the United States. I came from Guyana, South America, and I've been honored and privileged to be a citizen of the United States. I have voted in many elections before, but it is my considered opinion and view that the way that the United States have elected their officials, especially the office of president, senators, state electors, statewide electors, is unconstitutional. And I would like to approach the Supreme Court to give a definitive ruling on our Constitution. I believe it is the way we are doing it is flawed, and I want to, in this discussion, to bring that up. So I will bring that Constitution up that we are talking about, which is the Constitution of the United States. And this is important. This is the way our government, our president, is elected. It's under Article 2. Section 1 talks about what the power of the president, Section 1:1, but Section 1:2 is pivotal, and 1:3 to the election of president. In Section 1, subsection 2, under Article 2 of the Constitution, it says each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. In other words, what it is saying is that each state will have the number of electors made up of the total number of representatives within that state and the two senators that are elected to represent that particular state. So each state will have the number of electors is made up of the number of persons going to Congress, the House of Representatives, and the two senators for each state. What is important is subsection 1:3. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for two persons, one of whom at least shall not be inhabitant of the same state with themselves, and they shall make a list of all the persons voted for, and of the number of votes for each, which list they shall sign and certify and transmit sealed to the seat of the government of the United States, directed to the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the vote shall then be counted. The persons having the greatest number of votes shall be the president, and so on and so on. What is important, my fellow Americans, is what Section 1, subclause 3 says. That the electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for two persons. One, of course, is the president, and the other one, the vice president, of whom one at least shall not be inhabitant of the same state with themselves, but more importantly is, and they shall make a list of all the persons voted for and of the number of votes for each. What this is telling me in my interpretation of Article 2, Section 1, subclause 3, is that each elector vote independently for the president and the vice president. What we have done in the past is that we have delegated that if a candidate wins the majority of vote in the state, all the electors vote for that candidate. This is not what the Constitution says. This Constitution is very clear, and that's why I'm appealing to you. If you agree with me, we need to go to the Supreme Court to get an interpretation of this subclause. that they shall vote, they shall make a list of all the persons voted for, that is for the office of president and the office of vice president. It don't have to be the same person for president. It don't have to be the same person for vice president. It will be whatever the elector voted for, and of the number of votes for each. And what I want to bring up, my fellow Americans, is I will minimize this, and I'll bring up for you what the result of the last election. And this is what the last election shows. And it's right here. In 2020, this is what we have seen in the map. And I want to expand this so you can see the entire picture. America voted the way it is. What we have done in the past is that, let's look at California. California have 53 representatives to the Congress, and we have 2 senators. So California have 55 electoral vote. What we have done in the past is that whichever candidate wins the majority of vote, and in this case, we will see it's all blue, so you would expect that these would have voted for the Democratic candidate. But they're also red here. And these would have voted for the Republican candidate. But what we have done in the past, we have given the candidate that wins the majority of votes in the state all electoral college. That is not what this Constitution is saying. This Constitution is telling us that the electors shall meet and then they shall make a list of all the persons voted for. They will vote by ballot for 2 persons, one for president and one for vice president, of whom, and then they shall make a list of all the persons voted for. What this is telling me, my fellow Americans, is that in this configuration, California, we have 42 blue circles here, which means that 42 of the representatives in California, or the district that voted these 42 candidates, they voted most likely for the Democratic office for president. What this Constitution is saying is that these 42 electors that represents these 42 districts will vote for the president on the Democratic list or the Democratic Party. But we also have 11 congressional districts in California that vote Republican. And what I'm interpreting the Constitution to say, that these 11 Republican electoral college persons will vote for the Republican candidate for president. Because most likely, and again, it's not difficult for us to, technology is incredible, most likely these candidates that won on the Republican side, their congressional district would have voted also for the Republican candidate. So if we were to do that, then California 55 Electoral College will not go to one candidate. It will be divided based on the votes that is cast in each of these congressional districts for the candidate that won that electoral district. And I am of the assumption, based on this configuration, that the blue that we see here in California, most likely the persons who voted in those congressional districts for the House of Representatives, they would have also voted in more cases than not for the president being the Democratic candidate. Similarly, those who voted for the Republican House of Representatives in California, they would most likely would have voted for the presidential candidate that the Republican put forward in this election. So if we were to follow the Constitution as it is written, then 42 of the electoral vote for California will go to the Democratic candidate. 11 of the Electoral College in California will go to the Republican ticket. Now let's look at like Texas. Texas have a similar situation like California, except a little different. We see blue in Texas and we see red in Texas. So in this election in 2020, there are 13 blue dots, which means that 13 congressional district was won by Democrats. And if that is, not that if that is so, that is exactly what happened. It means that the district that vote Democratic candidate for the House of Representatives most likely would have voted for the Democratic candidate for president. In that case, Texas 13 electoral vote should be cast in favor of the Democratic candidate. That's how the district voted. And we have 23 voted for the Republican, and most likely those 23 electoral districts would have voted for the candidate for president as well. So in the case of Texas, 13 of the Electoral College would have been cast for the Democratic candidate, and 23 would have been cast for the Republican candidate. Now, when we get to the senators, as we see, the senators is statewide. So in this case, in California, because of the dominance of the Democratic Electoral College and the congressional seat, then more likely than not, both of those senatorial electoral college would vote for the Democratic candidate. In this case, when there is 23 of Republican district, 13 is Democratic district, which is 36, that will tell me that 18 of those electoral district, half of the 36, would vote for, decide who to candidate for the Senate is. So the Electoral College person that represent the Senate, which is the two senators, we will have 36 total electoral congressional seat. We divided by 2, which is now 18. So 18, the Republican won 23. So one of the senatorial elector will vote for the Republican ticket. The remainder of, if we do 18 and they have 23, that's only 5. But the Democrat have 13. So it means 13 is higher than 5, the remaining of the 23. So the other senatorial elector will vote for the Democratic Party candidate. And that's how I interpret the Constitution to be. So we cannot give all the Electoral College for the party or the candidate won the most vote. This is not, the United States is not a democracy. United States is a constitutional republic. And every county, every senatorial district, every congressional district in each state have a voice in who their elected representative is. And that's why I'm saying for the office of president, we will have to give each candidate what is given to them. So now I want to bring up this spreadsheet that I did. I did a spreadsheet and I want to expand this, and this is what it's showing me. If we were to follow my interpretation of the Constitution, and I believe I am right, and I just want our, Americans to support me in this, and if you think this is where we should do it, then let us go to the Supreme Court to get an interpretation of our Constitution for that Article 2 that I spoke of. In the case of Maine, both the congressional seat went to the Democratic candidate, So most likely that will go to the Democratic presidential candidate. So 2 congressional seats, and they will get both senators, this electoral college. So in that case, Maine will have 4 votes for the electors, and all 4 of those votes will go towards the Democratic candidate. The same thing Vermont. Vermont has 1 congressional district. That electoral person will vote for the Democratic candidate because they won that, and the 2 senators. So the 3 persons in Maine, in Vermont, sorry, the 3 elector in Vermont will vote for the Democrat candidate. Then we go to New Hampshire. 2 again, the 2 congressional district was voted Democratic. They will get 2 electoral votes, the Democratic candidate, and of course the 2 senators. So that's 4 votes goes towards the Democrat. Massachusetts, there's 9 congressional seats, and again, all voted Democrat. So the 9 electoral college plus the 2 senators will vote for the Democratic candidate. Rhode Island, the same thing. 2 congressional seats and 2 senatorial seats. The 4 will go towards the Democratic candidate. Connecticut, the same thing, all goes to Democrat. Let's look at New York. In New York, we have 19 of the congressional seats is won by Democrat, 8 is won by Republican. That's 27. So half of that is 13, well 14, let's say 14. So if we take away 19, take away 14 from 19, that'll be 1 seat. On the senatorial side, the elector that represent the senator in New York, 14 of that half of 27, I'm just rounding up to 14, 14 of that from the 19 will be 1 elector that vote for the Democratic candidate. Now from 14, 5 remain of the 19, but the 5 is lower than 8. So the 8 representing the Republican side, so that 1 other candidate will now vote for the Republican ticket for president. So now 27 plus 2, 29 in New York, 19 plus 1, 20 of those electoral college will vote for the Democratic candidate, and 8 plus 1, 9 will vote for the Republican candidate. That is how I see the Constitution telling us what to do. The Constitution did not say that all the electoral college from a state goes to the candidate that wins the majority of vote in the state. That, my friend, is unconstitutional. And I'm saying, if you agree with me, let us go to the Supreme Court for interpretation of that clause. And I did an analysis of all the state, and this is what I came up with. In the 2020 election, 221, maybe 222, would have been voted Democrat. The electors will vote for the Democratic ticket. 213 electors will vote for the Republican ticket. Of these senators, now the 100 of them, 42 of that elector within each state would have voted for the Democratic ticket, and 58 of the Senate electoral college in the states would have voted Republican. In that case, the Democratic candidate would have received 263, 264 electoral college vote, and the Republican candidate would have received 271 electoral college vote. If the Constitution is, if we follow the Constitution as is, this is what the presidential election should have been. And I'm calling on all Americans, if you believe that this is what it should be, that we need to form We need to go to the Supreme Court and let the Supreme Court interpret that Constitution. And I'm bringing it back again one more time to talk about what our Constitution says. And the Constitution is very clear. It says, each state shall appoint in the manner of the legislature, therefore may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. And then subsection 3, section 1, subsection 3, the electors shall meet in the respective state and vote by ballot for 2 persons, and they shall make a list of all the persons voted for. So it means each state electoral college representative will vote according to each congressional district that the candidate won. And if the voters in that congressional district voted for a Democratic candidate for the House of Representatives, most likely they would have voted also for the president. And in that case, that electoral college vote should go toward that candidate. And the number of votes for each, which list they shall sign and certify and transmit sealed to the seat of government. My fellow Americans, this is how I interpret this article. And I would want us to please go to the Supreme Court for an interpretation. The way we have elected our president has been unconstitutional. It is not what the Constitution says. If you agree with me, please let me know. Let us together form a union, go to the Supreme Court to get an interpretation of this clause. Never did this clause say that a candidate that wins the majority of votes in a state wins the electoral college in that state. There's nowhere in this Constitution that says that. So what we are doing has been unconstitutional. Let us change that. This country is a republic. The United States of America is a constitutional republic. We are not a democracy. The total number of votes in a state is irrelevant to this Constitution. It is the electoral college vote that matters. And no candidate can win an entire state electoral college vote if they did not win all the congressional districts in that state. If they won the congressional district in the state, yes, the Constitution says they will also win the electoral college. The same thing for the senators. The senators, we have 2 electoral colleges in each state, and we must determine how those 2 electors will vote based on the overall list. And this is exactly what this is showing us here. So in this case, both in Texas, both the Republican and Democratic candidate will get 1 elector each for the purpose of the Senate. The same thing will apply to Florida. Florida, the Democratic candidate will get 1 electoral college that represents the Senate, and 1 will vote Republican. Look at California. In this case, we talked about this before. But let's look at those states where only 1 party vote, like West Virginia. They will get, the Republican candidate will get all 5 electoral college vote, 3 congressional plus 2 for the Senate. Rhode Island, the Democratic candidate will get all of the electoral college. Same thing with Connecticut. Same thing with Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, right? The same thing with Hawaii. Same thing with Alaska. The Republican candidate will get all the vote. Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Utah, Idaho. The Republican candidate will get all the electoral college in those states. New Hampshire, the same thing. Iowa, because there is 3-1, most likely the Republican candidate will get all the elector for these 2 senators. But in this case, there'll be one electoral college that will vote for the Democratic candidate. And this is my interpretation, my friends. If you agree with it, please let us go to the Supreme Court and get an interpretation, finally, that we will elect a president that follows our Constitution. And I will get to the rest of it. I want to also talk about the citywide official, the statewide election. We are electing it incorrectly. It's unconstitutional. The senators that we sent to Washington, they're also elected unconstitutional. So there's a lot of things that we need to correct in this beautiful country called the United States, and we can start by going to the Supreme Court for interpretation. Let me know what your thoughts are. Thank you. God bless the United States of America.